Welcome to Team Time. I'm your host, Gordon Coombs, the Executive Director of Team Wellness and Prevention. Team is dedicated to promoting healthy lifestyles through the prevention of substance abuse. Team promotes youth, health, and wellness to prevent substance abuse. We work with community organizations, schools, families, and individuals. From mentoring programs that help youth make healthy decisions, to partnerships with alcohol retailers and dispensaries to ensure their safe service and sales, we believe that the community is the team to propel youth to reach their true potential. Team Time is a monthly information series presented by Team Wellness and Prevention. Team Time tackles tough issues surrounding substance abuse in our community with subject matter experts. This month, we are talking about childhood trauma and the impact of trauma on substance abuse. Through our work here at Team, we see a significant number of youth and young adults who are using substances to self-medicate or to deal with trauma in their past. We have some special guests here today who specialize in treating trauma.
Our first guest is Lisa Popoff from ChildSafe. She's the Executive Director. Lisa, do you want to come on up?
Hi, Gordon. Thanks for having us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us.
Of course.
So tell us a little bit about your background and tell us a little bit about ChildSafe.
Okay, so I actually started at ChildSafe about 2.5 years ago. Before that, I was Executive Director of other nonprofits. I was on the City Council for 8 years here in Fort Collins, and I landed with ChildSafe, like I said, 2.5 years ago, and I could not be happier. So, yeah.
Excellent. So, ChildSafe, tell us a little bit about.
We provide therapy to victims of child abuse, primarily child sexual abuse. So, 77% of our clientele are victims of child sexual abuse. We provide therapy, which ranges anywhere from individual to group to family therapy. We have an art processing group. The goal is to get people from surviving to thriving, and we'll use whatever methods we need to in order to make sure that our clients get individualized therapy for whatever their issues are.
So I know from my time in law enforcement, it always shocked me to find out how prevalent child sexual abuse is in this community. The caseload for those investigators was huge. Easy for me to say because I work narcotics and we pick and choose the number of cases that we work. How prevalent
is it? I don't think we really actually have a number. What I can tell you, it's 1 in 4 children will be victims of child abuse before the age of 18. Of that, probably a very small percentage are actually reported, and an even smaller percentage are actually prosecuted. So regardless, we see children who have been suspected of child abuse. If there has been a court case, or not even a court case, if there's been, if it's been filed with police, we can use victims' compensation to pay for their therapy. Having said that, we never turn anyone away because they can't pay for the services that we provide. Over half of our clients are extremely low income, so that comes up a lot. We have a sliding scale for other individuals who come in. Another thing that we find really important is to see the entire family, so we don't just see the victim. We feel like if you have a child in your household who has been the victim of child abuse, child sexual abuse, it doesn't just impact that child, it impacts the entire family. We also have a class that's open. All of our groups' therapy is open to the public. We have a class for parenting traumatized, or how do you parent traumatized children, called Beyond Consequences, and that too is open to the public.
And meaning anybody can come in?
Anyone can come in. Yeah, you just have to call ChildSafe and sign up.
Awesome.
Yep.
So at what point does a victim get connected with your organization?
You know, it really depends. Sometimes it's right when the parents discover what's going on. A lot of our clients are actually self-referred. We last year had, I think, 37 referral sources. So it really depends on the individual child. Once they go to CASA, Child Advocacy Center, Voices Carry, they're typically referred to us or to Summit Stone for further therapy, regardless of where they are in that process. We do have clients who are adults who were abused as children And we have a program for them as well. That's about 1/10 of our program.
So if an adult comes in and says, oh wow, I'm dealing with all these consequences
Happens a lot.
of these things, these issues, they can come in and
Yep.
help.
Yes, our clients range in age from, we have a 1-year-old right now, and we range in age from 1 to 80. We've got one of our clients is in her 80s. So,
Wow.
yeah, so, we see a lot of adults who come through the door and say, this is something I've never dealt with before, and I need to talk about it because it's impacting my job, it's impacting my relationships, it's impacting my ability to function, and, I'm done. I really need some help. And as we're talking about today, a lot of it has to do with substance abuse. It's a coping mechanism.
Wow. So can you tell us a little bit about the background education level of ChildSafe counselors, staff?
Yep. So all of our therapists are master's level. Most of them actually are licensed, or they are required to be working towards licensure if they're not licensed currently. And we have one therapist who you'll talk to today who is working towards her PhD. Yeah.
Okay. And you talked about ages. It runs the gamut,
Yeah.
obviously,
Yeah.
from 1 to 80.
And so I'll talk a little bit about and Sandy can actually fill in a little bit more when she comes up here, but we get a lot of questions about how in the world do you work with a 1-year-old? How do you work with a 2-year-old who's been traumatized? We do play therapy, and as long as they can play, that's how children communicate. So we can actually help them work through their issues because they will communicate very clearly what's happened to them, and they, through the course of their treatment, will work through it through play. Yep.
So what's the ideal outcome? What do you hope to see from a client that comes to ChildSafe?
What we hope to see, I think, Sandy obviously will expound upon this, but, I think that what we like to see is that they're using healthy, that they have the tools that they need to cope with what happened to them and function in a way that, you would hope that they optimally would in society. There's no magic bullet. What we do know is that our clients get re-triggered later on in life. Say they get married, say they have children. Those are triggering events for them. So we're very clear about the fact that if you need our help, we're going to be here. We've been here for 32 years. We've had several clients come back. And we say, I like to say that it's more of a chronic issue as opposed to an acute issue, because it will come back, and there's no shame in coming back and trying to work through whatever is triggering you and putting you back into a place that doesn't feel very healthy.
Absolutely. So with that said, without further ado, we welcome Sandy Robbins to come up and chat with us. So Sandy, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do at ChildSafe?
I am completing a PhD that focuses on adolescence and empathy development with regard to wilderness situations. So I'm looking for outdoor programs that actually contribute to empathy development in our youth. So I have a clinical specialty in adolescents and young adults of roughly ages between 13 and 25. I usually joke and say I kind of stop working with them when they're cooked. About 25.
That's ironic because we look at we talk about developing brain years, and we talk about the clientele that we work with is generally 5 to 25, and with a kind of an emphasis on, especially with some of our programming, with that 15 to 25-year-old.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, it's a crucial time for a lot of adolescents. It's confusing and tempting, and child sexual abuse absolutely has a deleterious effect on what we consider normal development for an adolescent brain.
Yeah, absolutely. So, can you tell us more about trauma? Can you give us kind of a background and overview of what trauma is, and what are the effects of trauma and impact on your clients?
Sure. Trauma is, if you were to Google the definition, it is essentially a deeply disturbing event. Most clinicians differentiate between what we call big T and little t traumas. What's important to know about that is that trauma is not in the eye of the beholder. So whether it's a big T or a little t isn't necessarily going to be the same for someone else as it is for the individual experiencing it. So sexual assault and abuse would obviously be a big T trauma, where a little t may be something along the lines of a breakup, or, for some of my clients, a pimple on prom day. So, but traumatic events significantly influence how adolescents function in the world. And for many of our clients, as Lisa was saying earlier, they come to us as children, or they come to us as adolescents or adults who've been traumatized or sexually assaulted as children. So early recognition is important, but sometimes that's not the case. And so by the time I get them as teens, usually we're seeing behaviors, grades are lower, inability to recognize risk-taking situations that may actually be life-threatening, and that's largely the work that I do with the youth who come to ChildSafe for sexual assault or trauma, but we do other things as well.
Okay. So I know that in our world, when we start talking about brain development and how the brain works and the science of it, that really resonates with our clientele and the youth that we work with. Can you tell us a little bit about the neurological impact of trauma and how it relates to the brain development?
Sure. So I'm not a neuroscientist, but I can answer it from a rudimentary perspective. The impact on a developing brain for both children, adolescents, and young adults is actually profound. Data conclude that not just the neurological functions with regard to synaptic connections and neural pathways are affected, but the actual components of the brain, such as the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex, the amygdala, those fixtures of the brain actually are underdeveloped, which means they're typically smaller. So when we see, for instance, the hippocampus, which is responsible for learning, we have an adolescent or a child who's not able to actually learn at the same pace as their cohorts in school. The corpus callosum, which is the membranous area between the two hemispheres of the brain, responsible for communication and cognition. Again, what we see is a child who's moving through a school system and grades, they don't necessarily do as well as their peers. What I think is significant with regard to the neurological aspects that we see is that the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for emotional regulation, behavior, and cognition, are also minimized. They're reduced with regard to function. We don't necessarily see ataxia from a diminished, an underdeveloped cerebellum, but we will see the behaviors. What's interesting is that a lot of the behaviors that come out in children in particular, but sometimes adolescents, are misdiagnosed as ADHD. So they're very, very similar with regard to what they look like to a teacher or a layperson, or of course a parent or caregiver. So we have a child who's being treated by a professional and a caring parent and a teacher who's on the alert, but it's unfortunately the wrong diagnosis. So as the child is being treated for this situation, ADHD, what we don't realize until perhaps even later, even into adulthood, is that there's actually an underlying traumatic component. So it's pervasive throughout development, which of course further contributes to that child's challenges as they're moving through their developmental spans.
Wow. It's fascinating because I think back to my pre-public health career, my law enforcement career, and oftentimes as a law enforcement officer and my colleagues and myself, we tended to think, people are choosing to do bad things. Mm-hmm. And as I've learned more and speak with people like yourself and understand the brain development, you start to understand it's not somebody that's just deciding to do a bad thing. It's somebody who's been the victim of trauma in their lifetime, and that has led to a development issue that results in doing things that gets them into trouble, especially when it relates to substance use. And then you throw in the whole coping piece of that. Mm-hmm. I mean, do you see that as well? I mean, it's not so much of a choice, it's coping.
Right. It's interesting, in my practice, I have both my primary practice as a ChildSafe, and then I also have a small private practice on the side that I also, and I can honestly say that most of the adolescents that I work with who do have trauma backgrounds do rely upon substances for coping. What's interesting is that I see it occurring for two different reasons, where we have depressants, marijuana is kind of straddles the fence between being a depressant and being a stimulant. But, you know, when we see someone who uses alcohol, for instance, as a way of numbing themselves down, they'll use the more party drugs like methamphetamine and cocaine to divert attention. So while it's not necessarily numbing, it's basically anything that they can do, including NSSI, which is non-suicidal self-injury, or cutting, burning, scraping. It's anything that they can do to not have to experience the emotional pain that came from their trauma.
So I imagine there's healthy and effective ways to address trauma, and there are unhealthy and ineffective ways to address trauma. Can you talk about that and how you help victims heal and deal with the trauma? Next.
ChildSafe uses, as Lisa indicated, a variety of different resources and options for our clients, in addition to talk therapies and play therapy. Play therapy for adolescents is kind of fun. You know, it looks different, but I'm a Sandtray therapist, and so I'll use that medium. I'll also use a lot of media, you know, because they're a very social media type of generation, and so I'll use all of those tools. We're also trained in EMDR and neurofeedback. We also have an adolescent girls group, and we have members so we incorporate quite a bit of interactions with regard to not just the therapist but their peers as a way of support. The focus, as Lisa indicated, and I'll reiterate, is coping. You know, the trauma never goes away. We know that. It's always going to be there. It's how our youth and our clients in general deal with the occasional trigger. It could be something that, you know, I had a client who was in her 50s who did a lot of work throughout her life, but she watched a movie. And it was a film that she had never seen before. It had a scene in there that immediately triggered her. But she knew what to do. She was able to recognize that she was being triggered by this particular part of the movie and was able to use healthy coping skills. So, you know, with regard to substance abuse, of course, it's steering our clients away from using those elements, but at the same time, we help them realize that they have to replace the substances right there in real time with something that's more healthy and, you know, more productive. Telling them to stop using it is not effective. They have to have something else that's hopefully better, and not ice cream. Depending on the client, is, you know.
So do you see that often, that where a client is, or an individual is going through life, seems like nothing's there are no issues, and then the next thing you know, something triggers it, and all of a sudden everything that's been repressed falls up? Is that common?
You know, I think we do see that. I don't know how common it is, but as you know, as we were saying, we have elderly individuals. I recently worked with, a gentleman in his 70s who had done a lot of work over the years, but simply just needed something a little bit extra because of this period of life. So I think it does happen. I think it happens all the time. And what I think we also see with adults is they're so focused upon their children and their families and taking care of business. They have a tendency, if they don't receive the treatment as younger people, they sort of skip 20 or 30 years or whatever, and then when they finally become older and they find that they have the time, they seek out treatment then and put themselves first. So I think there's various reasons why people don't necessarily be treated, or they're not treated right away, or they're recognizing symptoms later in life. But, you know, we will take them.
You know, it also, if you don't mind,
Sure.
it also goes back to, the fear of not being believed. It's why a lot of victims don't come forward.
That's true.
Because, you know, they won't get the help that they need because they feel like, oh, no one's going to believe me, or, you know, the grooming behaviors that went on between the perpetrator and the victim, you know, they were threatened, and, you know, that carries a lot of weight even later in life, and maybe they don't want to disappoint their parents or whatever. So a lot of our clients, our adult clients, will wait until their parents have passed before they'll come in and get help.
And we see this a lot with males, because of course there's a stigma with regard to males reporting sexual abuse, whether it's a female or a male perpetrator. I haven't necessarily seen a differentiation between the lack of reporting, but it's the male victim that is the key component there. They're worried that they'll be, you know, considered less of a man or less of a functioning male. I've had several clients come back used for neurofeedback and EMDR who were fine until they became parents, and then all of a sudden the male, that masculine aspect, you know, that is who they are, was being triggered by being fathers, especially fathers of sons.
You know, I guess I wasn't intending to go down this road, but you know, when we're talking about males, I think sometimes there's a perception that child sexual abuse is more female than male, and I don't know what the data is. I can tell you from again, going back to my law enforcement days, I was surprised to see the number of male victims. You guys see that?
We would agree with
Yeah,
you.
it's 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys for sexual abuse. 1 in 10 children will be victims of like physical sexual abuse before the age of 18. So the statistics are pretty high. If you look around the room, 1 in 10.
Wow.
So,
and I would imagine that there's, again, that stigma for boys. And again, a lot of these types of things that we're talking about, let's have the conversation. When we talk about suicide prevention, it's getting rid of the stigma. So hopefully, talking more about it, more boys that are victims will start to come forward and not feel the stigma. Any victim coming forward, I think getting the help that they need is awesome. But going back to substance abuse and how it correlates, we talk a lot about abuse, misuse, and substance dependency. What do you guys see when it comes to your clientele, especially in the age range that you're dealing with? Is it kids that are using, misusing, or are we down the road to where it's misuse, or abuse and dependency?
I would say all of the above, to be honest with you. We were talking just a little bit earlier about that. There is a gray area with regard to what is using just recreationally, party drugs, etc., and what is abusing. It's not a really funny joke, but I usually say my phone's going to start ringing on 421 because 420 is coming up, and unfortunately, I do get a lot of clients who, imbibed a little bit too much and were sexually assaulted as a result of not being able to protect themselves in those situations. I can say that most of my clients do use at least pot. We have seen, I believe, an increase in both methamphetamine and cocaine in Larimer County. Mm-hmm. And I was surprised to see how many of my youth actually were using those more hardcore drugs to either numb out or to divert their attention by becoming, more of the life of the party. So, is it use versus abuse? I'm not even sure I can answer that. For me, being someone who studies the developing brain of adolescents and kind of works with them, I'm worried about all of it, because what we know is that even a small amount of use for a young person whose brain, again, is still cooking, it could be deleterious to their ability to, continue functioning at the college level or maybe later in life when they want to take on a new challenge. So, I try to steer them away from all of it, but, of course, the common, especially after Amendment 64, the common argument is, it's an herb, it's a plant, I can do pot. But I'm amazed at how many of my clients actually smoke a bowl before bedtime because they have the insomnia elements to trauma. And so they may actually even be using in their minds or using it responsibly, but they're using it every single day. Yeah.
So we hear a lot in the news and in the media about marijuana and using it to treat PTSD. Is that an effective strategy, or?
I'm not sure I have the qualifications to answer that. I think that for some individuals it would be, but what I have known from my clients who do have the medical marijuana cards is that it keeps them from doing other things. They typically have a hard time holding down full-time jobs. So I would say it would have to be a very acute and serious form of PTSD, as opposed to something that's going to be debilitating to them in a different way. Using it to treat may, literally make the difference of whether or not they can be self-efficacious in other areas, I guess I would say.
I would also add too that we've been really fortunate in Larimer County to have, and I'm sure it happens elsewhere, but really fortunate in Larimer County to have the involvement in a lot of these nonprofits, yours and mine, of the marijuana industry. They are responsible retailers and they understand the correlation between what we do and what you do and what they do. So I just, I gotta say, as the ED of the nonprofit that receives the money from the marijuana distributors, I just really appreciate the fact that they're stepping up and being responsible retailers with us. So Just have to say that. So
Yeah.
same with alcohol distributors as well.
Yeah, in an ideal world, wouldn't think of, wow, you have somebody that's on the front line, really. You've got a bud tender or an alcohol, a bartender, for that matter, who's meeting with the clientele and potentially says, hey, this person might have an issue, and can slip a card to ChildSafe.
They're giving our cards out
Yeah.
at the places that sponsor us, so we appreciate that. I mean, they're recognizing that there might be some issues, and they have our cards.
That speaks a lot to
Yeah.
overall community health.
Yep,
and
absolutely.
working towards it. So we've talked a lot about trauma, substances, coping, all that. How's the treatment world working to address recovery from childhood trauma? Working together, is that starting to happen? Where there's this cross between the substance abuse treatment world and trauma in your world? Is that starting to happen?
Amongst here.
Amongst professionals?
Yeah,
you mean?
professionals. Yeah.
I would say that it's getting better. I've had clients where there were DHS cases that were present, and I was in attendance from the trauma mental health perspective, and there was another professional in attendance who was a CAC, and she was there supporting my client on the other end. I think we can always improve, but that's kind of the way it always is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to see more collaboration.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Is someone who has worked in the treatment field for 17 years and worked for a treatment center and goes to conferences, definitely our field within the past year, 2, 3 has stepped up for knowing without a shadow of a doubt that trauma is underneath a chunk, if not the majority of our client base. And now we're implementing trauma-informed care and then extended care programs where we have the client for a long time. We start to do, whether it's EMDR or neurofeedback, but so much more informed than when I first got in the field. Most conferences now are, the headline speaker is all on trauma, and we know without beyond a shadow of a doubt. So it's real exciting for us treatment people and me as a CAC to finally have it with all the ACEs studies and things that show the correlation. I think it's a super exciting time for all of us.
Yeah, I think about it and I go, okay, our charge is substance abuse prevention. If you really want to talk about how do we prevent this,
There you go.
right here, the trauma. We prevent the trauma from happening, or we get the people in that can help recover
Early on.
early on.
Yeah.
That's where we really can have make an impact and have a difference. What are some current therapies and practices that are being used? We talked about EMDR. Big fan of EMDR. Go on with another show about that. But can you talk more about some of those therapies?
Acronym alert. You have to tell what the acronym means, though.
Oh yeah.
Eye movement desensitization reprocessing.
Yes.
Okay. We have, as we mentioned, we've been doing neurofeedback for several years now, and in our practice we have found that because of the underlying trauma and the anxiety that comes from, not just living with the trauma, but also, again, perhaps being misdiagnosed, having the other subsequent issues that may occur in schools and families and in other social situations, anxiety is high with many, many of our clients. So we have found that using neurofeedback prior to utilizing EMDR has created a very smooth transition for our clients from calming their nervous systems down, then doing the reprocessing while doing some talk therapy. A lot of our clients, I do all of it, but we also, those of us who are neurofeedback trained also see other clients who are seeing other clinicians for primary therapy. So a good many of our clients actually have therapists twice a week. Once for that more mechanical part, that EMDR or the neurofeedback, and then the other also for talk. So we have found that to be helpful.
Should you talk about kind of what neurofeedback is?
Yeah.
Because that's kind of, I think it's kind of
Just a little.
scary.
So neurofeedback is a process, it's been around for I think about 40 or some odd years, and it's a process that we have a limited scope practice in our clinic, but we basically use trauma-focused intervention. So it is a non-invasive process. It's more of we sometimes call it a microphone. But essentially, it trains the brain through a series of frequencies to recognize when it's operating in a fight or flight area or frequency, and it trains it to recognize that and then lower its responses to anxiety or traumatic stimuli, triggers, that sort of thing.
It's interesting. We have a curriculum that we work with in some of our programs. It's called Brainwise.
I've heard of Brainwise.
It talks about the emotional elevator, the lizard brain versus the wizard brain. So I hear this and I go, oh, we're talking all about that same thing, that emotional regulation, building resiliency. So that's awesome. So can you talk a little bit about secondary trauma? How do you and others that are working in the field, are you susceptible to trauma dealing with all these really serious things that you're dealing with on a regular basis?
You mean like countertransference? That's what we're talking about?
Yes.
Yes, but I think that, ChildSafe has done, and a lot of it we have to thank Lisa for. We have a very comprehensive self-care program. We have funds that are being donated that we can use to, every month we're allowed to spend it on something that helps us kind of take care of ourselves. And
No alcohol, no drugs.
And no tattoos. I did say, can I use it on my tattoo? And they said no, so I had to pay for my tattoo. But I think that one of the things that helps us as a clinic, and as I indicated earlier, I am also in private practice, and I have found that there's a significant benefit to being in a clinical setting when you're working with other individuals. We can bounce ideas off of each other. We can say, wow, I'm having a crappy day. I really need some support. I can go into her and say, I need to talk to you for 10 minutes just to debrief. So we rely upon each other as supports, and it's wonderful because we all know where we're coming from. It's kind of the magic of being the adolescent girls group too. They know that the people in the group understand them. They may not have identical experiences, but they understand what they're thinking and what they're feeling and some of the things that they're talking about. And that's what we do too. So, and then there's rum, but that's what it is. But
Wellness dollars don't go towards
they
rum.
don't go towards. Yeah.
Hey, we get sometimes pigeonholed as being kind of a teetotalist, prohibitionist organization, and that we are not.
We're responsible.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And we don't use them as coping skills.
Yes.
I'd love to open it up to questions from the audience. Does anybody have anything they'd like to ask? Any curiosity they'd like to share?
I heard you mention that you have usually people will be in some form of therapy at ChildSafe for at least a couple sessions per week, or maybe up to a couple sessions per week. How long is the therapy process typically? I know that there's a huge range.
Sure. We don't do brief therapy. So, it's not like an EOP, what is it, the IOP, thank you, or something along those lines. I would say our therapeutic process lasts a minimum of a year, depending on the level of trauma and, of course, the type of intervention that we choose that's appropriate for the client. It can be up to 2 years or so. And then we have some folks who just come and go because they kind of get maxed out. They hit a plateau, but then they'll come back a few months later and continue to restart. So we have clients who've been with us for 8 years or so.
Even longer.
And I would say most of my adolescents, about 2 years, up to 2 years. And it was interesting, I had a comment from someone just last week where this individual said, I'm surprised you guys keep your adolescents as long as you do, that they stick around as long as you do. And I was thinking, well, it's because I'm immature and it's because they really like working with me, but they really do. Most of my kids actually do stick around for a period of time for us to actually complete their therapies. And I don't know if I can always say that about the adults. They have a tendency of leaving, perhaps they feel better, and life intervenes and they get super busy, and so they may leave prior to truly completing. But most of my adolescents actually stay to completion. And completion, as you said, looks different for everybody. So it's just a matter of, can you use healthy coping skills when you're at school and something happens or you hear a noise in a hallway? What are you doing? And if a healthy coping skill is going to talk to their school counselor, that's great, as opposed to skipping and meet someone at the gas station or getting into a car with a stranger. So those are successes.
So I always say about 18 months. You know, that's the average. Having said that, as Sandy said, you know, never shorter than about a year. It's interesting, and you correct me if I'm wrong, our younger, like our itty bitties, you call them, what do you call
Tweety
them?
birds.
Tweety birds, our little Tweety birds. They know when they're done.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to come and go see Miss Melissa. They're kind of like, nah, I want to stay at home and play. So it's interesting that they know when they're done, and that's typically around the 18-month to 2-year mark. So, and with, like Sandy was saying, a lot of our adult clients have more severe trauma backgrounds and, you know, ritualistic sexual abuse and that sort of thing. And so they've been with us for anywhere between a decade and more. And we have 2 therapists at ChildSafe who solely see older clients. So they see, you know, the adults who were molested adults who were molested as children. And that's, like I said, out of 721 clients last year, we had about 70 to 75 who were adults.
What can you tell me about the girls group that you do?
Adolescent girls group.
Adolescent.
We actually have 2 girls
Two.
groups. Yeah, we have one for middle school, so we have a younger one too. They do scare me, and so I like, my peeps are the 13-year-olds. I always say, give me every grouchy 13-year-old you can possibly. Great with that. Our adolescent girls group is within it's high school, but depending, it's based on maturity. So if I have a 13-year-old or 14-year-old who's still in 8th grade, but has the maturity of someone in high school, I do open up the group to them. And then we go to about 18 or graduating high school, whatever occurs last. So once again, I try to keep some of them for as long as I can. And then just recently, I've kind of opened it up to a couple of my college freshmen. I have 3 graduating seniors right now that I'm begging to stay because that experience of working through this process and then transitioning into this other element is really beneficial to my young ladies. We are one of the few groups at ChildSafe, as a matter of fact, maybe the only one, I'm not really sure, that doesn't focus specifically on sexual abuse. It's trauma in general. And the reason we do that is because adolescents don't want to talk about that all the time, every single week for a year. So I found that we have a substance abuse component, and we actually, it's Educate the Counselor Day, and so they give me all the fun names for all of the drugs. We write them on a whiteboard, and I take a picture, and, you know, because they know stuff I don't know. They know how to contact people. I learned about vaults from a 14-year-old a couple years back. I didn't know what a vault was. So our group actually has several components. I think of it as very discrete units that, you know, we have a curriculum, but the discrete units can be moved around like shells in a game depending on what the young people need at that point. So while we cover pretty much the same things every year, we might cover something in September, but then the following year it may not come up until January. So we talk about everything from sexual assault to healthy relationships, substance abuse, eating disorders, NSSI, or non-suicidal self-injury, which of course is cutting, burning, scraping, biting, etc. We discuss how coping skills are rampant throughout the entire group. They're allowed to name the group every year. Our group right now is Bueno Nacho. I have no idea where that came from, but the mascot is ramen noodles, and I don't know where that came from either. So that's, yeah. I have found it helpful to have a group me, so our adolescents are actually able to talk to each other and to me and my co-lead. His name is Brian Williams. We're very fortunate to have a guy for the first time in ChildSafe history, and it's awesome. And so we were able to communicate with them, not just during that period of time, but within reason throughout the week if there's a problem, and it's wonderful. The girls support each other tremendously. They do all have a trauma background of some kind. So if it's not sexual assault, it is perhaps witnessing domestic violence or, you know, some other situation that we would consider a big T trauma.
Once a week?
Once a week. It's Thursdays from 4 to 5:30. We are winding down right now, so I'm not accepting any new young ladies. However, by popular demand for the second year in a row, we are going in the summer, and so I'm accepting new clients in the summer. So we don't really limit the amount of young ladies who join the group. The only real requirement is that they have to have a counselor. Most of them are mine. They're all my young ladies. There's a couple that actually have counselors that are either in ChildSafe or outside of ChildSafe. But we do that because it is a trigger, and we discuss certain behavior, we don't call them rules, we call them like group norms or expectations, but just last week one of the young ladies was talking about something and she goes, okay guys, this is a trigger alert. And so they're sort of conditioned to realize it's a form of empathy, is to realize that what you're about to say may actually have an adverse effect on whoever's listening to you. And so to watch these young ladies develop through the course of the year is honestly one of the joys of my life.
I believe it.
Yeah. Our very last project, which we're working up towards, it's the last week of May, is a freak flag. And so they fly their freak flags. And so the idea is they've built these relationships for most of the group. Some of them are, later additions, but they do so well with the other people, and my young ladies are so welcoming. So at the very end, I give them pillowcases, and they paint these freak flags, and it's supposed to represent those parts of themselves that when they started the group, they were shy about, or they weren't comfortable discussing with other people, and now they are. And they range from, religious beliefs to political beliefs to weird hobbies to whatever. So, and that's the last week in May, and then we'll start our summer session. So, I love them.
Sounds like a good group.
Sure. What is a vault?
Okay,
What is a vault?
a vault, and I'm not do you know?
No.
Okay, so a
Oh,
vault.
jeez.
I discovered vault. There was a case almost 2 years ago in Canyon City, and you may be familiar with that, where all of the young people were sexting each other. A vault is an app that is hidden from parents, and so if you're one of those awesome responsible parents and you have your kids' passwords and you're looking through their phone to make sure that they're being good little bunnies, and you won't see this app because it's hidden from view. Only they know how to get to it. And in the case in Canyon City, which I think was in 2016 or 17, right? They busted pretty much most of the school because they found that these sexting photos were being kept in the vault. And so I've educated myself. That's sort of a simple.
Okay.
I'm not super techie. That's why I work with teenagers, because they help me with my phone and video equipment and stuff. I don't know. But that's how it was explained to me. So it's something that we try to share with parents through psychoeducation with them so they know what their kids are up to.
And it can look like a news app.
It can look like a variety of apps. There was one apparently that looks like a camera too. So yes, it can look like just basically something that you would not be suspicious of.
Every time she opens her mouth, I think to myself, thank you for having grown children. So I'm so glad. I
We
look at my
survived
adult
that.
children and go, I'm so
my God.
glad I didn't know any of this. I mean, not that I wouldn't want to know, but it is slightly terrifying to hear Sandy's stories. So, but yeah, it's really good though that, the work that she's doing is opening up literally vaults with these kids of information, and they're no longer afraid to talk about the worst things that ever happened to them.
So this is something we deal with a lot when it comes to substance abuse prevention, and now I'm hearing it in your world, and I want to get your opinion on it. So we run into parents from time to time who think that looking into those cell phones of their kids is a violation of their privacy, and feel reluctance to get involved to that level. And we encourage them to, and try and encourage parents that, that phone probably belongs to you. And not only that, your child, until they're an adult, definitely belongs to you, and their privacy is limited to what you give them. So from your perspective, the importance of being an active parent and getting involved in that, you agree that's an important piece of being an active parent?
I do. I think that there are ways to go about that respect your child's privacy at the same time being the parent that we really do need to have watching our kids. One of the fundamental elements to a vault is drug trafficking and drug use, because they contact their dealers. And I had a young lady a few weeks ago who used this type of an app to get some acid and drop some acid with a friend of hers at the park. And her dad found out about it because they ran into some trouble and he had to go get them. So that was the good news, is that he found out because they were okay and they're safe. But I think that we do have to be careful with regard to, how we approach our children. The parents I've struggled with the most are the ones who care so much they get angry, and they don't necessarily take the time to effectively communicate the importance of this to their young people. And when I say young people, I mean we have children who are 9 or 10 years old who are watching pornography and are doing drugs so it's not just adolescents anymore. It's definitely our prepubescent children as well. I work with parents all the time on how to ground effectively. Taking the kid's phone away for months at a time is not going to help, because the kid's going to get a tablet from a best friend, or is going to find some other way to download an app. Once their phones are turned off, you can download an app and they can still make phone calls. That was something a client taught me. So I think that the involvement of the parents is absolutely crucial. I think it's a little bit of a dance, and it takes some skill, and I have found a great utility and wonderfully helpful to me to not just work with parents, but to work with schools, counselors and teachers and other professionals in the schools, and they know as much as all of us do with regard to a lot of what's going on. So I think there are resources out there for parents to call and say, I have no idea what to do, and we provide those. I'll get those calls frequently. They're not even my clients. I just try to help a little bit with some rudimentary, some fundamental stuff. But yes, I do think that in the world being what it is, we need to be more aware of what our kids are doing, which I thought was interesting. Did you guys see that? Was it Utah that passed the free range law? The free range parenting? Yeah. I thought it was Utah. So they no longer, their kids can, I think it's Utah, they can run around and they can sort of do their own thing without having a DHS call made. And I'm not sure how I feel about that. So it was just within the last week, I think. And I was along those same lines. Does that mean they're not checking their cell phones, or they're not sure? I'm not quite, but yeah, it's a tough time to be a parent. I think it has been for at least a generation.
Any more questions from the audience? As we wrap up, what I would like to know, and what's kind of come to me as I've been sitting here, is for even my staff and others that are working in the field, if we run into a child, then we start to go, there might be some underlying trauma here. How should we handle that? What's the best way to work that and even refer them to you guys?
Give us a call, and Val does an intake.
Yep.
So we get those all the time.
Yeah, Val is our clinical director, and you can contact us at 970-472-4133. And Val, our clinical director, who also founded ChildSafe 32 years ago with a couple of other folks, she does the intake evaluation and determines which one of our therapists would best be suited and whether or not ChildSafe is really actually a good fit. So yeah, give us a call, 970-472-4133.
And to further expound upon that answer, we would actually ask you to call, because one of the things that we have found, and any mandated reporter probably has the same story. I always tell my clients and my parents of the clients that I work with, listen to your gut. Yep. That's your sixth eye. That's that part of you that is that reptilian brain that's so important. If you're thinking, there's something going on, there's probably something going on, or has occurred in the past. So, it's better to act, as we indicated earlier. The best way to reverse the deleterious effects of child sexual abuse is to treat it early on. By the time they become adolescents, young adults, or even fully cooked adults, it's still doable, but it's harder. They have more going on, and their brains are developed, so those synaptic connections and those neuronal pathways have been formed. So it's almost like deprogramming. We've even made some of those connections with regard to, it's almost like a cultish behavior, because they're so used to behaving in a certain way. So please call.
Absolutely.
Or call the hub. That's another option for you folks too. Do you know that number? Mm-hmm. Okay. By heart?
Yeah.
Me too.
Well, so thank you for coming. One thing, so next episode of our next program, next team time, is going to be May 2nd, 3:30, here again. We have Lori Stolen from the Mental Health Matters initiative in Larimer County is coming with a couple of others, but she'll be the main guest. Hope you can join us then. Thank you so much for being here. This is awesome. I am excited to see how all these different worlds kind of interweave and what happens if we start looking at taking a holistic approach to it. Thank you all.
Thanks for having us.